Welcome back, everybody. In this next conversation, we'll be exploring how faith-based and community-based organizations can play a powerful role in ending violence against women. I'm honored to be joined by Christina Jones, the founder of Command Join Company. Christina, can you briefly introduce yourself and tell me about the work you lead?
Yeah, so as someone who has seen the criminal justice system firsthand fail survivors of abuse, I spent the first 15 years of my career focused on change inside and outside of the courtroom. So when I was 9 years old, I was in the criminal justice system as a victim of sexual abuse. And I remember thinking at 9 years old, this system is not working for me. It's because after the abuse was disclosed, I had amazing parents who immediately advocated for me. And when I went to the police station, the person who interviewed me was a white man. When I went to the hospital to have the examination, the person who examined me was a white man. When I went into the courtroom and had to sit there, the prosecutor who was in charge of the case was a white man. The judge was a white man. And it isn't that white men cannot successfully help young Black girls through the system. It's just these four failed me. And they failed me because they didn't have the tools to actually relate to and help guide me through the system in a way that a 9-year-old should be guided. So when that happened, I remember sitting in the courtroom and just thinking, this isn't right. It shouldn't be like this. And I decided that, I wanted to be the change that I needed as a 9-year-old girl. And it's no coincidence that this was 1994, the same year that the Violence Against Women's Act was passed. Because then 15 years later, I walked into the same courthouse where I was victim number 4 as an assistant state's attorney.
Yes.
And for me, it was all about being true to that 9-year-old girl and being that change that I wanted to see in the system. And I dedicated my career to making sure that women and children were safe. And not just safe in their homes, but also safe within the systems. Because the paternalistic nature of abusers can be replicated within court systems. I saw it firsthand. So that's why I decided to become a prosecutor. Then after that, I decided that, the prosecution system, even though it has its flaws, it does have some really good prosecutors working within the system, but prosecutors cannot do it all. So I decided to go into policy to see if there were systemic ways that we can help change systems. And that's where I fell in love with the nonprofit world. So I became an executive for a national nonprofit that was focused on domestic violence and the law. And one thing that the government can't do is it all. Right. Nonprofits are such a vital part of making sure that survivors feel safe, feel seen, and are advocated for. And a part of that work, not just national nonprofits, but also faith-based communities. Because for Black people, especially Black people like me, church is also a system.
Absolutely.
It is a system that we integrate ourselves within. It is a system that is oftentimes patriarchal, and that same power and abuse, that same cycle of control can be replicated within the church. So what happens when you're a survivor and you enter into the faith system? Do churches know, do faith-based communities know how to talk to survivors, how to not blame survivors? And what happens when the abuser is also a part of the church community?
Right.
So my role now is to make sure that not only are survivors safe within criminal legal systems, civil legal systems, and churches, but also that nonprofits have the tools that they need for the infrastructure, for their sustainability, where they can actually help and do good work for survivors.
Yes. Thank you so much. One, thank you for sharing your story and being vulnerable, but also thank you for that perspective, because I really appreciated that you said from the beginning, it wasn't who these people were. It was that they did not have the tools. They were not equipped to support you. It's not who the church is or the role that they play. It's they don't have the tools. It's not the community-based organization, but it's the lack of tools, resources, and knowledge that prevent them from actually, doing the work that they need to do and preventing more harm. And I'm also blown away by your ability at 9 years old to recognize that something was wrong, that you were not being properly taken care of, that the system was not working for you and with you to help you through your situation. So shout out to you for knowing at 9 years old that you were going to come in and be an attorney. But also shout out to you for taking that pain and channeling it to something else, because as you said, 15 years later, you walked in as the prosecutor, which is amazing. So thank you so much for that. And on that point, you've built your career around helping mission-driven organizations grow stronger and more sustainable. And you also bring your perspective as a survivor. What led you to connect this work with advancing the elimination of violence against women? I know you talked about it a little bit, but tell me more about, like, how do you draw the dot between becoming the survivor to now becoming the advocate and the voice for the survivor?
For me, I just wanted to be what I didn't see. And the really cool thing about being a prosecutor in a system in which you were a victim at one point is I got to see women and children and girls through a lens that I saw myself through. And I'm not saying that every prosecutor needs to be a survivor, but what I am saying, it is really special when we take our pain and we turn it into purpose. I never told victim survivors my story because it's not about me, it's about them. Okay. But oftentimes, every once in a while, one of them would stop me and say, Miss Jones, were you sexually assaulted? And it would kind of pause me a little bit because I would have to decide, do I want to disclose? Do I want to keep it about them? But for me, it was about being real with survivors. And when they asked me straight up, I would say, yes, I was. And I remember one young woman said to me right outside of a courtroom in the middle of a trial, she said, I knew that because of the way that you treated me. Wow. And that is exactly how I wanted to feel at 9 years old. And at that point, I knew that not only was I walking in my purpose, but I was making a difference in every single person's life that I was affecting as a prosecutor, which is why I decided after a while, let me go into policy work because I want to see how can we make this happen on a systemic level where people can get the training that they need to make people feel seen. And really, as a survivor, that is the best thing you can do for them because I can't control the outcome of the case. Right. Prosecutors can't control the outcome. Advocates can't control the outcome. But what I can control is, do you have a voice? And do you feel seen within the process? And that's how I was able to connect those dots.
Right. And that's been such a reoccurring theme. We've heard that all day, just elevating and escalating the voice of the survivors, making sure that their voice is the center of the work that we do. It's the center of the strategy that we create. It's the center of the operationalization of those policies and practices. And so digging into that, like with your experience in working with churches and nonprofits, what strategies do you see as most critical for building that infrastructure in communities to making sure that survivors feel seen, they feel heard, they feel loved and known in those spaces?
Well, first we have to actually talk about it. Because one of the things that shows up a lot, and this is not just the Black community, this is many communities, the good old saying, what goes on in this house
stays in this house. That's
yes. Right. And for our community specifically as Black women, that used to help save us because really we have to take it back to times of enslavement. And back then, if we were assaulted as Black women who were enslaved, if we were assaulted by someone who was connected to our enslaver, our grandmothers, our aunties, our mothers would say, don't say anything because that can get you into more trouble. So what goes on in this house stays in this house. And that was used as a protective measure because you never knew who was going to sell you off, who was going to mistreat you because of the rape that we endured as Black women. The problem is we took that same protective measure that may have worked in 1820 that does not work in 2025.
Correct.
So a part of the problem is we're not actually talking about it. We're not actually calling it out. We're not actually saying that abusers live in the same homes, in the same communities, attend the same churches as we do. And a lot of times abusers have often been abused. So if we're not going to talk about it to the young people who are being abused, of course, that's why it's so pervasive within our communities, because we're not having those conversations. And then making sure that we actually have policies that are written down, that are created before something happens so that a survivor doesn't get inconsistent advice. That happens in churches and that happens in nonprofits, where they'll go from person to person and get told completely different things. And how do you think that makes survivors feel? Confused.
Right.
You have no idea what you're talking about. Why should I trust you? Because now you're not telling, this is the perspective. Now you're not telling me the truth.
Right.
So whenever there is no truth, there is no trust.
Right.
So a part of the importance of making sure that we have written down and consistent policies is to make sure that survivors trust us. And then the last thing is really about collaboration. How are we collaborating with other nonprofits? How are we collaborating with other faith communities? How are we connecting faith communities and nonprofits to make sure that survivors are actually served? Churches cannot do it all. The government cannot do it all, and nonprofits cannot do it all. But when we collaborate, that's when the magic happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Christina, I could sit here and talk to you all day about this. Unfortunately, we don't have the time. But I just want to leave you 60 seconds. If you could inspire the next prosecutor that is standing in that gap and saying, okay, this might be something I want to pursue, or I'm here pursuing this work, what would you say?
I would say keep your focus, because a lot of times as a survivor, you have something sitting on your shoulder called imposter syndrome. A lot of times people, you have something sitting on your shoulder that's called imposter syndrome. And one of the things that I've experienced is that little voice saying, you can't do this. You can't show up in the way that you want to because you're damaged, because you're broken. And what I say, because actually I had a law student tell me this recently, that she was also a survivor and wanted to become a prosecutor, is you have to remain focused on what your goal is and who your person is that you are doing this for. Mm-hmm. My person was 9-year-old Christina. And once you find that person is oftentimes your inner child, you keep your focus and you keep it moving.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Christina. I appreciate you sharing your story. I appreciate you sharing just the information about strategy, educating the community, educating churches and nonprofits, and the idea that it cannot be done alone. Government cannot do this alone. Church cannot do this alone, but it must be done in community. So thank you so much for your time to joining us today. And thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.